Hey, welcome to the show. My name is Mike Phillips, and I am the host here of the Leadership Toolkit. Thank you so much for generously joining us today on the Leadership Toolkit. As always, we go through this, we talk about leaders' successes, their failures, what opportunities they may have for you to learn, because what the real goal of this show is, if you're a leader or a manager or somebody that's moving into that role, we have these collaborative conversations with other people in various verticals of business so that they can bring awesome content and awesome training to you. Because part of the reason you're probably tuning into this show is the fact that you want to push yourself, to grow yourself, and this is a great place to start training. So I have an absolutely amazing guest with me again today. He's a favorite on the show. My favorite, well, he's one of my favorites on the show.
Man.
My buddy Ian from Grow Up Leadership. He's with us again today. Last time he was with us, we spent a lot of time talking about performance management and leadership, sort of some generalized pieces. I think he and I are going to dive down a little bit more today into, especially, I think that one of the things Ian brought up to me was establishing workplace trust. So welcome to the show again, Ian. Appreciate you joining me.
Thanks, Mike. I'm excited to hang out with you as always. I love talking about leadership, chopping it up. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation getting into the concept and topic of trust. Will be fun, man.
Absolutely. And for those that may not know, and what I'll do is I'll throw a link up if you want to watch the last episode with Ian. He was talking much more exclusively about performance management at work. So I'll put a link up there in the corner if you want to take a look at that episode. Do me a favor, Ian, if people are not familiar with you and your business, Grow Up Leadership, if you would take a minute and just kind of introduce yourself, give some background, and thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. So my name's Ian MacLeod. I provide leadership training services to both individuals and businesses, with really a focus on fundamentals of like we talked about performance management, leveraging my 15 years management experience at a large nonprofit organization that culminated to a senior role with about 5 large teams and about 80 staff reporting up to me. I also have about 5 years experience training and onboarding new leaders. So, as well as ongoing development for a large leadership team. I currently, like I said, and like you shared, have a small business providing leadership training and consulting services, particularly for entry to mid-level kind of managers. Also, I'm actually going back to school for business administration, working towards earning a master's degree in that. And then I'm also currently working as a part-time assistant manager at a boutique hotel that was previously a client. And that just gives me some more consistency and allows me to actually actively practice what I teach. And then, of course, as many of us create leadership related content for YouTube and TikTok as well.
Absolutely. Well, again, welcome to the show. And I think one thing that I think is great is we as leadership creators and leadership consultants, so often, like, you just can't sit still. So one of the things that you just said here is like, hey, I'm still doing this because that way I'm in it and I can practice what I preach. And I think that's absolutely awesome.
Yes.
So as we talked about, one of the topics that Ian wanted to get into today on this is workplace trust, like trust in the workplace, trust from leaders, trust between team members and their managers and leaders, workplace trust, I think, in general. So first off, we're just going to dive right into it. In your experience, Leon, or Leon, leadership Ian, I've now coined you.
Nice.
Oh, I always got to represent when Ian's on the show.
Let's do it.
Let's go. All
That's
right.
going to be on the side there. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you rocking the hat.
Absolutely. I love it. So in your experience, Ian, leadership Ian, what are sort of the core elements? What are some things that form the foundation of trust in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably some more formal definition with psychology and sociology and that kind of thing. There's actually a professor, Cicely Cooper, who refers to some of the core elements when you're thinking about trust within the workplace. First off, I mean, just the idea of treating employees fairly, right? So,
Sure.
pay, decision making, evaluations, just making sure that you're treating them fairly and it feels fair. I think one of the other components is aligning words and actions, right? So following through what you say you're going to do, actually doing that, being reliable. The other component as well that again, Cicely Cooper, she's a professor at Northwestern University, and she refers to the importance of transparency as well. So just being transparent in your processes, in your strategic plans, involving your staff as much as possible in that, making sure that they're aware, getting their feedback. The more transparent you can be with that, as far as, again, evaluation process, planning, everything that you're doing as far as all your procedures and protocols, the more engaged people are going to be and the more trusting they're going to be.
Can I jump in here on something you just keyed in on?
Absolutely. I got one more.
Sure. You go first, and then I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay. The last one that I think that and it might even lend itself to where you're going. But I think there's another component that people don't think about as much when we talk about leaders and managers creating trust. But the other side of it is it's so important for employees to feel trusted, right? That they're not only trusting you, but they're feeling like you trust them, and you're creating this environment where you're really creating that kind of autonomy, promoting from within, that kind of thing, and it's reciprocal. Once they feel trusted, they're going to trust you, and it just creates that kind of back and forth environment.
Sure. It's synergistic. No,
Yes.
and I think those are some really really good points, right? Do what you say you're going to do. Be transparent. How can somebody be more transparent? Because I think it's easy, especially in leadership and a lot of different verticals. Transparency has become this buzzword, or it was a buzzword for a little bit. Like, oh, you got to be transparent. You got to be transparent. But what does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
to be transparent with somebody, what is that?
And I mean, it depends on the situation. It is situational, but I think the main point is bringing people into that conversation. So, at my previous employer, our strategic team not only created a strategic plan, and oftentimes that kind of large strategic plan at a high executive level gets communicated to maybe like senior management, maybe even down to some of the more mid-level, front level kind of management.
Sure.
But it's even that, it's high level, and oftentimes it just feels like it just gets put on a shelf somewhere, and it's no longer discussed, or it's only being discussed at the senior level. My previous employer, what they did was they actually made a strong effort to make sure to communicate that down, all the way down to frontline staff, making sure that they're involved in that conversation. They're aware of, okay, when we're talking about this, what does this look like 2 years from now, 3 years from now? And these were plans, again, that were like a 5-year strategic plan. So some of it might be hard for your staff to always wrap their head around. But when you can actually then lay out, here's where we're headed, and here's what your role means to this. This is how you align with this, and this is how you participate in this kind of achievement of this larger goal. People are going to be a lot more engaged, a lot more invested. I think the other thing too that I would say is involving them as much as possible in your evaluation process. The best possible way to help people perform is to allow them the autonomy to self-evaluate if possible. So giving them the tools where they understand what's expected of them and how they're being evaluated, and they're part of that conversation, so it feels very collaborative and supportive. I think that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the key things, transparency, comes down to the quality of our communication,
Mm-hmm.
right? How well are we communicating? And you said something here that's really valuable, is like a lot of times senior leaders, executive management, as it will, they'll take this, here's this concept and here's this idea, but then they put it on a shelf and then they never communicated about it again until 90 days later, when they say, well, you were supposed to be doing this thing. And it's like, well, okay, what are you talking about? I was supposed to be doing this thing. We haven't talked about it since January and it's June, right?
Right.
Casey Hughes brings up a good point. She says everyone should know about overarching goals and what that means every day. And I think
Absolutely.
spot on when you're talking about transparency, like you had said, like just continue to communicate it. You just continue to communicate, and that ties in with doing what you say you're going to do. You're not just saying it one time and then there it goes, right? You continue to grow that and to groom that in the direction that you want to go, that the team members want to go, that the organization's headed.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
I agree 100%.
so
Sorry.
let me no, you're good. That it's easy to talk about trust overall. Like we all have a perception of what trust is. But I want your opinion on this one when we're talking about workplace trust, specifically between leaders and team members. And one of the last things you said, I'm sorry, this is just how my brain works, folks. So we go off on adventures sometimes.
Let's do it.
One of the things that he said is it's important for team members to feel trusted. So between leaders and team members, or team members and leaders, and we talk about trust as this sort of ethereal thing, right? How do you gauge it? How do you measure? Is there a way to measure workplace trust?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. And I think what I would do, and I think even what experts have I've read, other experts talking about this. Again, experts being researchers, psychologists, those kind of behavioral scientists.
Sure.
The one of the things that's suggested oftentimes is the trust. To your point, trust means different things to different people. So my suggestion would be is you need to talk about trust with your team and unpack the word. So unpack the word trust with your staff, your team. Ask them what their perspective is and how do you establish trust together. It needs to be a collaborative, and that's where you can start, right? Then you can build all these other collaborative things of, like you were talking about, collaborative communication, collaborative planning, making sure that they feel involved in evaluations and in goals and strategy and all of that. But starting there with just, what does trust mean to you, and how do we all make sure that we're using the same language? What does that look like here at this place of work, right? Because the thing is, and we've all worked at different places, it feels different in different places. There's different
Sure.
work that you're doing. So establishing that as a team, that in itself will build trust.
I think that's really valuable, and it shows caring. I think
Mhm.
people need to know trust is created when people realize that you genuinely care about them. And the fact that you're willing to ask their opinion, or the fact that you're willing to ask somebody, hey, listen, tell me what this means to you. Not you're not just dictating, hey, here's what this is, right?
Right.
You're taking the time, and one of the things that you said here is to be collaborative. That's, I mean, that's even what we talk about on this podcast. Let's have a collaborative conversation, because at some point you and I could share some differing views, right? But how do we work together to have a really good conversation so that people can grow from that?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's massive. The fact that someone may care enough to bring everybody together and say, let me hear about this, without discounting or without saying, well, this is without delegating what trust is, right? Or not delegating, but dictating what trust is,
Right.
right? Because it's easy when you are the leader or the manager to say, hey, here's what this means. And they're like, well, that's not how I view it. So you have to be able to take those other opinions into account.
Absolutely.
Casey brings up another question or a comment here and says, do they come to me about every move they make? If they do they feel that I don't trust them to make the decision and act on it?
That's an excellent point. Yeah. I think that's the thing, is that if you're seeing, and the point Casey's making is, if you're seeing your team coming to you, asking you every question, a question about every action and task, did I do it right? Then, obviously the environment feels like there's a lack of trust there. And that's the issue.
Well, it becomes, I think oftentimes when you get into an environment of micromanagement,
Yeah.
That micromanagement in itself screams, I don't trust you to make a decision. I'll never forget. Here's a little story from the story from the car business, right? Automotive files.
Nice.
I remember one time, this is early on in management. This is probably 19, 20 years ago. And eh, eh, my manager, our dealer principal, came and we were talking about how to manage people. And he was sharing, I don't remember if he was sharing this story or if I was engaged in it, but it was like we had a salesman come in and say, "Hey, boss, you want me to make a half a pot of coffee or a full pot?"
Mm.
It's like, really? That if that doesn't scream that they don't feel trusted, right? To determine the amount of water and coffee to make, it's one of those things that was just so far off that it's like, oh my gosh, okay, we got to fix this. And so I will never forget that, because it was just like, I mean, for goodness sake, like, somebody is so I don't want to say triggered, but so questioning of their own ability as to, do I make a half pot of coffee or a full one? It's like, wow,
Yeah.
that was crazy.
Well, and that you see that quite often. And I think the question to ask is just, I mean, again, building trust, you have to be honest and open and candid and say, hey, why do you feel that you need to ask me this kind of level of question? Or do you feel like the environment that we've created is causing you to be apprehensive about something this minute? Are you getting feedback on that level? What's causing this reaction from your staff to really
Sure.
want to double check every little thing that they're doing, or be fearful? And unfortunately, I will say, in in my work with consulting, I have run across more than I like, potential clients. They don't end up usually being a client. They're potential clients because they reach out, and what they're wanting is they're wanting their staff to change, yet they don't want to change, right? They want to continue with this kind of critical communication that they have, and then they identify that their staff are unhappy, that they feel like, they feel the staff seem resentful. It almost feels like a toxic work environment, yet they're wanting their staff to change and they're not wanting themselves to change. And I have to have that real conversation of like, look, you can't have both. You can't have this ultra critical, um, communication style and micromanage and have all these high expectations without having supportive communication over here, and then just magically expect your staff to comply because you're paying them.
Sure.
We're past those days where it's the only thing that's important to people is a paycheck. People are wanting more. They're wanting to feel, invested and involved and engaged in a workplace. They want to work at a place where they feel like they matter, they're valued, and that they feel like they have a purpose.
Well, and I think one of the things, as you're talking about it's from a consulting viewpoint. People, oftentimes leaders, top leadership in organizations will reach out to whatever, a trainer, a consultant, all of these different things, and then they say, well, they assume somebody like yourself, Ian, is going to come in and just blindly support them. Oh, well, you got
Right.
to support me in like, I'm hiring you, and so this is what I want. And the reality is, for people that have experience, will look at it and say, well, wait a minute, okay, do you want me to tell you what you need to know or what you want to hear? Because if it's the want to hear guy, I'm not your guy or
Absolutely.
gal, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I've lost so many clients. I mean, I have had so many potential clients who don't turn out to be a client, simply because I told them candidly that until you change this isn't going to improve.
Absolutely. One of the questions I was going to ask, and we can just expand on it if there is something, but
Yeah.
are there other mistakes? Because we've touched on a few, but like, what are some other mistakes that leadership makes that may damage trust? We talked about not listening to people. We talked about only micromanaging and doing it their way and so forth. What any others that come to mind?
One of the things, the biggest things that I see that managers make a mistake about, or leaders make a mistake about, is they put their own competency and their own reputation
Mhm.
over trust. So they they sometimes will not admit a mistake or own a mistake. They won't take ownership of this because fear of looking incompetent. Um,
Interesting.
but and and so they're more worried about how they appear as far as their their abilities and their competency than the trust that they have. And if they had just took ownership, hey, I made a mistake here. We're all only human, right? And the more you can actually be vulnerable and be honest, um, you know, the the more you're going to be able to connect and build that trust. When you're not, and when you don't take ownership, that quickly erodes trust. And I've seen that time and time and again, where trust has been eroded simply because the 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 person in that leadership position is not taking ownership or responsibility for their own actions or the actions of their team or their leadership or whatever. I would say trust is more important than the fact that you made some mistake. Um, so that would be probably the biggest thing that I would
No, I
tell you.
absolutely agree with you. One of the things I've talked about with several people on the show, ego, right?
Yes.
And that like all of those things feed into ego. The fact that they're not willing to be vulnerable, the fact that they're um, not willing to follow through. We said early on, like, do what you say you're going to do. Like ego, that is such a massive killer.
Yeah.
And the hard part is there's just a really fine line between um, ego, confidence, arrogance, those sorts of things. It's I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, and Casey points out, living up to their own your own standards, being inconsistent, and I mean, it's really a big problem when it's so what's so fascinating to me, and I was just kind of referring to this, but when oftentimes I see this where people are looking into leadership development, right? Or they're again potential client coming, looking for information. What they're looking for is they seem to be on this hunt looking for information to fix their employees. Um, and the approach should be instead, how do I improve or develop myself? How do I get better so that I can create a
Right.
better environment for my team so that my team can get better and achieve those goals that we're all working towards?
Well, and I think one of the things that's so hard for anybody to accept, I'm a fan of Gary Vaynerchuk, right?
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that he has said in the past and many times is, you got to accept that it's your fault. As the
Yeah.
leader, everything, like, the buck stops with you.
It
It's
rolls
it's
up.
my fault.
Yeah.
And especially newer leaders and managers have a really tough time swallowing that pill. They have a really tough time swallowing that statement because they're like, well, it's not my fault. It's this guy or that gal, and it's this person in that department. And you've got all this going on, right? Versus just taking it, and it does speak volumes for respect, for trust, for a lot of places. If you just say, hey, I own that, it doesn't matter if you're the new person or not. So if you're a newer manager listening to this, guess what? It doesn't matter. You gained the opportunity to inherit all of that last person's
Yeah.
issues, problems, lack of trust, right? You have the badge and the label. You're that person. That's where you're coming in. And that's the gauge that they're measuring you against. But starting right now today, you have an opportunity, and doing things like Ian said, just do what you say you'll do. Like, that's not a hard bar to hop over, right? But if you say, and here I'll tell you this without going way off on a rant, Ian. But like, one of the things that I think a lot of leaders don't realize is, since we help to set the bar, right? Make it a bar that's easy to step over. Make it a bar at the beginning by collaborating with people. If somebody says something that is simple and within your control, and you say, yeah, I can do that, then just do that. Like, it's not um we all go in with these big visions of grandeur and these big huge opportunities, or opportunistic things that, oh, we're going to do this, and we're going to sell 1 million widgets, and we're going to make all this money, and we're going to do this and that. And then at the end of the month, right, they're gauging you and looking at you and going, well, wait a minute, we didn't do those things. And you're like, oh, I forgot to tell you, that's the 5-year plan, right? Like, what are you going to do for me today? What are you going
Right.
to do for me this week? What are you going to set up those little checkpoints and those things that you can just that are inherently you to be able to do. And it's like you can set those up for small wins along the way, and not just for you to win, but it allows the other people to win, right?
Right. Which then builds their confidence, trust, all those things that you're talking about.
So Casey has another one. Casey's a participant today. She's
Thank
a
you,
friend of
Casey.
mine. I was talking to her the other night. I said, "Hey, you should tune in and watch the show." I see. I knew she would have no shortage of comments and questions, so it's perfect. We should include her as an you've been ordained as an all-time audience member. So she says, "Ask you, Ian, what do you do as a consultant when the problem is at the top and not at the bottom?"
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I'll be honest. I mean, I've learned to be candid and realistic with them, because otherwise, I mean, I know I'm not going to be able to deliver on the expectations that they have of me, because I know that if they don't change, it's not going to produce the results that they want to achieve. And so I've unfortunately come to terms with the fact that I've lost out on a number of potential clients, people who, it's money that I've basically kind of had to be real with and say, look, this, I see this as this is the actual area that we need to focus, the opportunity, as you were saying, that's really where we need to be fixated on and focusing on. And that will then lead towards this larger conversation and this larger ability for your team to be successful. But we need to fix this over here. And some people are down for that. Some people say they're down for that and they understand. But when the rubber hits the road, that's a whole nother conversation. So it's a good question. And I honestly think, I believe wholeheartedly that the biggest problem with the workplace today is not the frontline people. It's the people at the top.
I would agree with you 100% on that. And here's something else. So there's a couple questions for me that come to mind. Because you're saying, okay, how do you determine when the problem is at the top and not at the bottom?
I also have a book here. It's literally called, it's by Gallup. It's called It's the Manager. I mean, it's the manager is oftentimes the problem.
So the answer is it's always at the top.
Well,
The reason that,
not
well, but
always,
but here's why I say that. When somebody's wanting you to come in and hire you as a consultant, and I legitimately ask that question, like, hey, do you want me to tell you what you need to know or what you want to hear? And they say, tell me what no, absolutely. Tell me what I need to know. Okay. I need to know that I can be completely frank, honest, and transparent right up front with you. Is that okay? I get the top person's buy-in first. They say, yeah, absolutely. Tell me what I need to know. Okay. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to fix you and your processes. So we're going to look at management first, and they'll go, well, what do we, here's the thing. The things that you're doing right now to manage your organization, to manage your team, to manage your department, whatever that may be, the things that you're doing to grow and train people, they got you to where you're at. And that's why I'm here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
great strategy.
So do you want to know what you need to know or what you want to hear? And they go, no, I need to know what we want to hear. So first, for me, I dive in on that, because if it is the owner, like if it's the owner of an organization, they have such a vested interest. And one of the convoluted things is an owner or a top person, a CEO, an executive, often thinks that all of the people should have as much buy-in and have as much desire and excitement and fire and engagement as they have. Let me give you a tip. First thing that you can tell them is like, well, no, they're not going to, because it's not their business.
Right.
Yes, it's their livelihood, but they're working for you. You already got us to this point. You, whoever it may be, you got us here, right? But let's break this down first. So you go through that first, and you have that conversation with them. And first you have to get their buy-in that they're willing to make some changes. And then I agree with you. There's lots of things on the front line. People are jaded. People don't feel trusted. People have a negative attitude. Sometimes it's just like with cancer. What do you have to do with cancer? You got to cut it out, right? And so sometimes you may have somebody that is on the front line that has to go. Sometimes you may have somebody in management that has to go. If they're the negative person, like those are those things that you have to uh, like you got to go after it right now. Don't wait.
Right.
So
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
so here's some other good comments, right? It says that's an excellent title. That's an excellent title of the book. What was the book? Hold the book up again.
So it's from Gallup, the
Okay.
organization Gallup. It's called It's the Managers. Came out. It's probably like 2019, I think.
Okay.
It's in by the same people that did like the Strength Finder books and stuff like that. But all the research keeps pointing to the manager is the problem for the most part. So that's
This
where
is
you
a
should be focusing your
this
your
is a
energy.
strong statement too. No, and I love that. Moving from boss to coach. I think it is so valuable to have people that are willing to coach.
Yeah.
And I've been told that regularly. Like to me, like when I get in and not that I get heavily into titles, but my channel is leadership education. And it's like nobody gets excited. Nobody cares about leadership education, but people know what a coach is.
Right.
I think this is great. I'm going to read it exactly how it's typed. You're excited by the thing. You're excited by the thing. They have to be excited by you. Like that's something that builds trust is when people are excited that they get to come to work and work alongside you. I'm gonna from now on it's excited.
I mean, I'm fine with saying excited too, but absolutely. I mean, you have to create the environment where people are excited by you, excited by the work, and they're to your point, they're not the owner. So you need to create as much buy-in as possible by creating opportunity, engagement, collaboration, and oftentimes, unfortunately, when you already have as the owner or the main boss or whatever, if you already have everything figured out and you are just operating just off a task list, just off a checklist, people are not going to be motivated or engaged by that until you
Sure.
give them some opportunity to actually own some of that, have some autonomy, be able to build mastery and have purpose. It's just not going to happen. um, and that's where you should be driving to, is creating again autonomy, mastering, purpose. And that means you need to let go someone as a leader and stop being so controlling. Oftentimes is really the answer.
Absolutely. So let me ask you a question. When stuff is broken, um, if trust has been compromised, you go in and something's not right, what are some steps that someone in a leadership role, and it could be somebody existing, because there's maybe two different things, right? If you have an existing leader or manager that's broken trust, what are the steps they could do to rebuild that? Secondly, if you have a new manager, a new leader, like hey, I'm somebody just coming in and this place is broken, maybe what are some steps? So let's look at that at two different pieces of the conversation, if we could. If I'm an existing manager and I know that trust is broken in my organization, what are some things I could do to rebuild that? One, two, three things.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, and I think it will vary depending on what the issue was and the team dynamics and all of that. But in general, I mean, as we were talking about, you need to be honest and take ownership. And even if it means that maybe you didn't actually do that, you can say, we as a leadership team, whatever it may be, we let you down. We weren't reliable. We weren't honest. Whatever it may be, own that first.
Mhm.
And then you need to start listening, really is the main thing. Ask, what was going on here? How did this feel? How are your feelings going forward? And ask your team, how do we correct this? How do we make this better? It doesn't mean you'll be able to implement everything, but they are involved and engaged in that conversation. And that's where it needs to start. Unfortunately, too often, you see, the senior leaders or people at leadership, they go off in a room and they figure it out and then come back with their plan. And the more you can involve your frontline staff, your staff in general, your team, in that conversation, the sooner and quicker you're going to build that trust back up. And I think the other thing, and this goes for either one, it can be challenging, but you need to stop being defensive. If you are a manager it is not, and we were kind of talking about this
Hmm.
again, it's not about you looking competent. You already are in the position. You're in that job already. You already have the title.
You made
So
it.
you made it. You're there. So you don't need to sit there and convince everybody that you need to be there. Instead, you need to listen. And that means maybe just saying, what's the problem? Listening. And do not, I see oftentimes too many times where people in leadership roles in these kind of conversations are ever have an answer for everything. They have an excuse. They share the reasoning. Well, let me tell you why we did it this way, or this is why this happened. Instead, don't say that. You need to just listen, and ultimately, then you just need to thank them for their feedback. I had to.
Absolutely.
We did a practice with some. We were doing a training, and then we had kind of this follow up kind of practice thing, and I had to go to a number of people who reported to me, and you basically had to say, what feedback do you have for me? You had to sit there and listen, and they knew they could say whatever the hell they wanted, and you just had to. The only response you could give was thank you for your feedback. So you had to take it, and some of it was sometimes a little harsher, or you wanted to be like, well, wait, I got you want to speak up, but you gotta just listen, and I think that's going to create that trust.
Well, and I agree with you wholeheartedly on this one. The one thing I would add is take notes.
Yeah,
If you're going to ask people for feedback, because it's really hard, just human nature, right? You ask somebody for feedback, and heaven forbid they give it to you, right? They're like, oh well, let me be honest, and
yeah,
and they start to tell you, and then even if you're not responding, right, you're biting your tongue, and you're doing that, even if you are not engaged in responding, your mind is responding. So one
right,
way that I have found that's worked for me in those situations is, like, I agree with you, take ownership, then ask questions and listen. Part of listening, I'll take notes, and then at the end of it, if you say, hey, great, thank you for your feedback, let me work on these, that's a way to drop your defenses, because don't
right.
respond in that moment. Then give it some time and space, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. You can go back with your notepad here and say, hey, listen, from the notes that I took the other day, here, let's address these few. Um,
Yeah,
because one thing I think a lot of leaders don't realize is debate, like, not true dissent, but debate will sharpen you, and it will sharpen your team. One of my favorite quotes is from Colin Powell, and I probably won't get it 100% correct, but the idea behind it, he says, when we are trying to come up with a plan, debate sharpens me,
mm,
but once we've made a decision, I expect you to take that decision and act on it as if it was your own. And so the reality is, it's he and the way it's referred to is, once we've made a decision. I think that's something that you said here a minute ago too, like, hey, we messed up, we screwed up. If you change we from executive management to we the team, we the people, right? I think that's something that's really powerful as well. Those are really good points. I was taking notes, so when I look down, I'm taking notes to put them in the chat so I can catch them later.
nice.
So what if
Yeah,
you're a new manager? What if you're a new manager, a new leader? You're coming into this team, and you know that trust is broken, things are sideways. What are some things that you do? Is it those same things, or do you do anything differently?
I think it is a lot of those same things. I mean, I think those apply to whatever the situation is. And to your point, you should be listening to listen and not listen to respond. Um, and then additionally, I think it's important to understand um, how important trust is, how important it is to be reliable, and make that your goal. And then ask your team, what does that look like, and have that candid conversation about what does trust mean to them, and what does that actually look like to them as well. um, to Casey's point, you aren't coming in, you've been promoted. um, uh, uh, but whether it be what one way or the other, if you are actually coming in off the street, or from outside of the organization, or been promoted, you're in this new role, and it can be scary. And I think the importance is just to be real and honest with people. People are way more accepting of you being honest, and that's what breeds trust, in comparison to like pretending or being an imposter or trying to play a role that you're not confident in.
Absolutely. The when we're talking about what if you're not coming in, you're promoted from the line. Several years ago, this is probably 10 years ago now, I was doing a podcast called Reignition. It's for sales and motivation. And this isn't a self self pump up, but I interviewed a guy on my show. There were two guys, Kevin Eikenberry, who's a
Mhm.
leadership consultant, and Guy Harris wrote a book called From Bud to Boss.
Nice.
And I got an early copy of it so that I could read it and then be able to have an interview. Guy came on my show and I interviewed him. How do you transition from front line to now manager or leader? And I would encourage anybody. I'll put that in the comments here once we. It was From Bud to Boss, and it's Kevin Eikenberry and Guy Harris, which is a great book for anybody. If you are on the front line and you're being promoted, they've got some really good points in there. As we're talking about books, because I like to give actionable things for people to do. So kind of two questions as we're coming down the pipe here. One, because you're a performance management guy from our last conversation, here's what I'm going to ask you. What is the correlation between workplace performance and workplace trust?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I mean, I think the thing is what we see, is if trust isn't there, I mean, what's people's motivation, right? What are they willing to do, and how far are they going to perform? That all is dictated by their experience, the things the baggage they may even bring. There's if you have a moment, this might take me a minute, but I
Sure.
wanted to share. There's an interesting study that was done and then re-examined, and looked at differently, and it's about reliability and that kind of thing. And I think that when you
Is
take the
this the
lessons from that, the
is this the
marshmallow
link from
test.
North? Oh
Oh
no, I
no,
was going to say, was it the Northwestern link you
I'll,
gave me earlier?
I'll share that one too. That one is called the Trust project, and that's from Northwestern.
Okay.
And then I'll send over the other one. But I think I was sharing this with you.
Yeah.
There's an old famous test that was done with kids. A lot of people probably seen it simply because it's super cute, right? So it was this test done in 1972 at Stanford University by Walter Mischel, a research psychologist.
Hmm.
Um, and he was looking at basically, he took kids, and you probably seeing this,
Yeah, they're like
where
5, 6 years old. They're
right
young kids.
in a research kind of situation, they put a marshmallow in front of them, and they basically say, if you can hold on, now I'm going to leave the room. If you can hold on, I'll come back. So you can eat this one now, or if you can hold on, come back, I'll you'll get another one, right? So just wait.
Hmm.
And so it's super cute because the kids are like, they're trying all these things to distract themselves. Some of them right away, like the researcher
Boom.
leaves and they automatically puppet it, you know. And so it's going through that process. Super cute. Everybody loves it, that kind of thing. And of course, there's some kids who were able to hold out, and then
Hmm.
others who weren't. And what they did was, so the Michelle and his research team actually followed those kids afterwards, and they concluded that ability to hold off, to wait, to be patient. They basically had better results in life. These folks oftentimes
Crazy.
had better outcomes in their life, and so it was that difference of basically looking at kind of self-control was really the
Hmm.
virtue, delaying gratification versus that kind of impulsive or short-sightedness. So another researcher more recently, kind of re-looked at the study and data. Her name was Celeste Kidd, and
Okay.
she was, when she was going to school, she actually worked with kids in shelters, and so she wasn't surprised by the instant gratification of some of these kids, and knowing that we know behavior is not just decisions that we're making in the brain, but conditioned based on social experiences and circumstances.
Environment.
Right,
Sure.
exactly. So what she you can conclude that, potentially that marshmallow test is also explained by how reliable or how trustworthy the researchers are from the subject's perspective, right? And again, the original test was done with kids who were, connected to Stanford, so they probably have various kind of, kind of better life situations in general. So, but the interesting thing, what Celeste Kidd did was she broke into two groups, basically a reliable and an unreliable group. And they were going to do the same marshmallow test, but just before the marshmallow test, they had this interaction to create basically a reliable or unreliable experience. And so they basically told the kids. So one group, the researchers basically said to the kids, if you can wait and hold on, I'm going to. You can either use these kind of crappy crayons, or if you can wait and hold on, I'm going to go get some great art supplies and all kinds of markers and stuff. For one group, they came back with all these great supplies, and then they had a great time. The other group, the researcher came back and didn't have what they delivered on. They didn't deliver on what they said they were going to do. And then they conducted the marshmallow test afterwards, that same marshmallow test. And what they found was significant differences. So the group that had the reliable kind of situation, they were significantly able to wait for the second marshmallow, versus that group that had the unreliable situation. That group of kids, they were significantly lower. They went for instant gratification much higher, right? So they couldn't wait. And really what that tells us is it's much, oftentimes it's about your experience. And if you don't trust, I mean, the whole thing is about the context. If you don't trust that second marshmallow is coming, then you're not going to do what you are asked to do. So that whole same idea in the workplace. If you're not reliable as a leader, if you don't create that trust, if you don't deliver on those things that you say you're going to do, there's no motivation for a staff member to do all these things that they say they're going, that you asking them to do. There's no reason for them to work hard to get to that promotion. There's no reason for them to work harder in general, because there's no motivation there, because they know that you're not going to deliver. They know that they don't trust that they're going to be promoted. They don't trust this, whatever this thing that this bonus or this more money or better works environment, or if you're not delivering on creating a better work environment, whether that be bringing in new staff or creating less work or making it safer or whatever, there's no reason for them to trust that. Hence why you see such huge amounts of quiet quitting. Gallup, the same people who made this book, they estimate that at least 50% of the workforce in the U.S. has quiet quit. The Great Resignation.
And what does that mean? Just expand on it if
Sure.
people don't know what
quiet quitting is basically the idea that you are just only doing at the level of your job description. You're not going above and beyond, which is fine. But the reality is, in this kind of work environment, we need people to be more engaged. We want people to be more collaborative. And it is means going above and beyond somewhat. And if people aren't motivated to do that, if they have literally just checked out and they're just coming in and trying to do the minimum, that's all you're going to get out of them. You're not going to be able to, again, create this environment where people are going to want to achieve the goals that you're setting as an organization, because they don't care. They're not checked in. So that,
Absolutely.
oh yeah. So I know it's kind of a long story behind it, but really, I mean, I think that it just really highlights the point of how important it is to be creating a reliable environment, and how being unreliable has such an impact on people's psychology.
Well, and I think people that are in so often we get caught up in the day to day as leaders, as managers. We get caught up in the things that we need to do, right? Or the perceptions of what we believe we need to do. And it's easy. I'm just going to call it like it is. Like, it's easy to forget the amount of impact something small can have on someone, right? Hey, the second marshmallow is coming, and they're like, yeah, you're full of it. Right. And so I think the story, like That's really valuable. And I've seen similar. I've seen them do the M&M test, right? We've seen parents do that now on TikTok and so forth, where they'll do it. And the interesting thing is to watch the kids' reactions, right? Someone will be like, I have no idea what happened and so forth. And I'm thinking about it like in the workplace, it's the same thing, right? You show back up and they're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no clue.
Right.
And so one kind of final question to take us out, since we've talked about it, and let me ask you sort of to think on this. Where do you see the role of trust in the workplace moving in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, especially with all of the AI and stuff that now people are relying on that? And so now there's times it feels like to me that it's like AI versus human intelligence. Where do you see that moving in the next 5 or 10 years? Is workplace trust going to be as important, more important? How do we make adjustments? Or what other trends do you see that could potentially affect that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, in general, I think as we see, as separate from the AI component, but just in
Sure.
general, as the workforce continues to advocate and look for better environments, to hear about these better environments, again, it's not just about a paycheck anymore. They're really wanting to be engaged. They're wanting to be involved. They want to be part of this bigger kind of purpose. It's trust is even more, it's going to continue to be important in terms of creating that collaboration, and where we feel like we are working together and we're collaborating together, instead of, you just do what I say kind of thing. So I think it's just going to continue to go up. Now, I think it's interesting when you bring forth the idea of AI, and how that gets into it. I've done some looking into that in terms of in terms of the impact to management. And they've looked at, actually, in Canada, they looked at, they did some studies looking at workplaces that added robots, right? So it's not exactly the same thing, but they added robots.
It is and isn't. I get
right.
you.
And what they found is that in those environments, actually, because you could, in a sense, the people were managing the robots, and things became kind of, I don't want to say easier, but it became easier to follow and manage, in terms of the work of staff. They actually saw a reduction in the amount of managers that were needed. The managers that stayed on, they became even kind of more important, and it was more important for them to be able to build better relationships, and trust and collaboration with their teams. But they actually had a decline in the number of managers needed. So I'm not exactly sure, AI, but I feel like, again, we're going to probably need to create a better environment where you do really feel collaborative. It does feel very supportive, but potentially we may not need as many managers, simply because people have the tools to do their work and more efficiently and effectively.
Well, and I think, I guess the reason for that, and I agree with you, I think at the heart of trust, there's emotion, right? If you have trust, then there's a certain level of connection and maybe happiness, or dare I say joy, right? Like that, like if I know I can trust someone, there's a real human connection. It's driven by emotion. If I know I can't trust someone, there's a certain amount of resentment and frustration and anger, right? And so the reason too is because there's so much talk, and not to get way off down a rabbit hole, but there's so much of AI, and AI is going to be taking jobs and so on and so forth. I think it becomes more valuable in the sense, because there's AI has no emotion behind it, right? There's no connection.
Right.
Casey says, well, as we're kind of headed out here, she says, inspiring trust means you can't forget that whatever else your job entails, no matter what your job description says, leader has to be the first thing on your list. And I think she says, you can't phone in that part of your job or nothing else will pay off. And then Ian shared here more about the marshmallow test. You can go to hiddenbrain.org and do that on the screen. Actually, for the audio portion, hiddenbrain.org/podcast/when to eat the marshmallow, or just probably Google the marshmallow test at Hidden Brain and that'll show up, because I think that's really valuable.
Yeah.
I think the bottom line in establishing trust is it does take, it takes, you said this before, it's about people. Right. You were on my show last. I remember one of the things that absolutely stood out to me was you made a comment and said, like, hey, if you don't like people, then you're in the wrong spot.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to me when people go into a role of management and they don't like people, and you're just like, well, this is the wrong job.
It's the wrong fit.
Yeah.
So kind of in closing here, how can people reach you? What's the best way to connect?
Yeah, man. So I appreciate that. So www.gro-leaders-up.com or my link tree as well. Hit me up for sure, which is link tr.ee/gro.up. Yeah, you up. But or just, I mean, certainly hit me up. I'm on LinkedIn as well, YouTube, TikTok. I'd love to, if you ever have any questions or just ever want to talk about leadership, man, I love chopping it up. So
absolutely, Ian, I absolutely always enjoy our conversations. Like, yes. I love your friendship. I love you as a person. I think you're a fantastic, just a genuine human being. And I love the amount of wisdom you bring to the show and the insights that you share with folks. So thank you for making the time today to share that with everybody. I appreciate you very much, man.
Yeah, man. Back at you, Mike. I appreciate you as well.
Absolutely. And that, my friends, is going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. As always, please remember to give it the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel here if you're on YouTube or on Facebook, whatever that may be. If you're tuned into the audio podcast, make sure and please share this episode with somebody that may need to hear this message. Our whole goal here is to help you grow through our collaborative conversations and other people's wins and losses and just these conversations like this. Also, if you know somebody that would be an excellent fit to come on the show and share their experiences, I'm always looking for great leaders, great managers, great people to have here on the show and interview. So thank you so much. I know your time is valuable. Hopefully we've been able to provide some value for you in this last hour, and I look forward to seeing you back here again next Wednesday, 12:05 Mountain, 2:05 Eastern.